the Mercian Itinerary, a complete triptych of world systems, boundary dissolution, and terminal assimilation. Aurora Archives, Systemic History Division, self-published speculative educational fiction, not peer-reviewed. This recording contains psychological horror, delirium, self-injury, body horror, disturbing consumption imagery, pregnancy-related distress, and identity dissolution. Listener discretion is advised. General editorial preface. The 3 records. This complete edition gathers the 3 surviving records of the Mercian Itinerary into a single archival sequence. They should be read neither as conventional historical claims nor as unrelated short stories, but as a connected speculative reconstruction. One observer moving through increasingly incompatible systems of survival. The first record follows a Mercian consciousness through the administrative and commercial world systems of the 8th century, Mercia, Byzantium, Baghdad, and Chang'an. The second record presents the debated North American continuation, where the observer leaves the Eurasian grid and learns that survival may require dissolution rather than control. The third record is the terminal fragment, recovered from Petén, in which the same dissolution becomes absolute vulnerability. The full structure is therefore not circular travel, but progressive exposure. Book 1, The World Systems. The observer learns that civilizations structure reality. Book 2, Boundary Dissolution. The observer learns to survive by dissolving into ecology. Book 3, Terminal Assimilation. The observer is consumed by the system he can no longer stand outside. Real places, historical periods, cultural references, plants, and material evidence are used for atmosphere and educational framing. The recovered documents, named archival interpretations, forensic claims, and events are fictionalized. This edition contains psychological horror, delirium, self-injury, body horror, disturbing consumption imagery, pregnancy-related distress, and identity dissolution. Book 1, The World Systems. There and back, across the world systems of the 8th century. Aurora Archives, Systemic History Division. Editorial note. On the reconstruction of the Mercian Itinerary. This document is a synthetic reconstruction derived from fragmented historical records, spanning 4 interconnected civilizations of the 8th century CE. Anglo-Saxon Mercia, the Byzantine Empire, the Abbasid Caliphate, and Tang Dynasty China. No single primary source describes this journey in full. Rather, the narrative has been assembled from numismatic evidence, Byzantine administrative records of foreign envoys, Arabic trade accounts of Rhodonite merchant routes, and Tang bureaucratic documentation of foreign visitors to Chang'an. The figure of Kinewolf is a composite construct representing plausible movement through real trade and diplomatic networks of the period. This is not a chronicle. It is an attempt to reconstruct what a single human consciousness might have experienced when traversing structurally incompatible world systems. No historical record confirms Kinewolf's journey, but no record could have preserved it if he existed. Plate 1.1. World Systems Route Map. Mercia to Byzantium, Baghdad, and Chang'an. Cartographic Index. Mercia, Material Certainty / Survival by Proximity. Byzantium, Temporal Delay / Survival by Permanence. Baghdad, Network Dissolution / Survival by Abstraction. Chang'an, Predictive Control / Survival by Conformity. Act 1. The Departure from Mercia. Systemic Annotation. A world built on wet earth and rotting wood, where oath words are the only stone. A king's reach is only as long as his spear, or so the elders sang. I believed them. I believed it until the king of the Mercians called me to his high seat and handed me a piece of captured sunlight, scarred with the tracks of desert spiders. I remember rubbing my thumb over the gold. Right across the center of the incomprehensible script, punched with brutal force, were the Latin letters of my lord, Ophorex. He told me this coin came from a place where the earth burns and men wear woven wind instead of iron. The men who struck this gold did not know our king. They did not know his God. But my king said this gold moves the world. He told me to find the source. When I pushed open the heavy, iron-banded timber doors of the mead hall, the transition was jarring. I stepped from the warm, loud, smoke-filled womb of the hall into the biting, wet, gray morning of England. My boots sank into thick, freezing mud. 3 days before the king summoned me, we had held the shield wall at the river against a raiding warband. I remembered the smell of iron and split earth. The line broke to my left. Not loudly, not like the songs say. No great cry, no heroic last stand. Just a gap, sudden and wrong where a man had been. I stepped forward before I understood I had moved. My shield caught the edge of an axe meant for another man. The force traveled through the wood into my arm, dull and numbing. The man behind the axe did not look at me. He looked at the space I had filled. That is how men die here, not because they are chosen, but because they are present. I drove forward, more from balance than courage, and felt the give of something soft beneath the rim of my shield. The line closed again. The world became wood, breath, mud, and weight. Later, when it was done, I could not say who we had fought, only that we had not broken, and yet one man lay still beside the river, untouched by blade or axe, his body taken by something none of us could strike. The elders whispered it was elf-shot, the invisible arrows of the beings that dwell in the deep woods. In Mercia, what we can see, we fight with iron and proximity. What we cannot see, we fear. We build our lives on wet earth and rotting wood. A hall stands for a man's life until a stray ember or a rival's torch takes it back to the ash. Waiting for me at the edge of the settlement was a caravan of strangers. They wore thick, layered robes, their faces wrapped against the damp. They were Radhanites. Their leader, a man named Isaac ben Nathan, did not carry an iron war axe. Instead, he supervised the loading of wooden chests onto pack horses, chests filled with bound, crushed reeds painted with black stains. Isaac told me he knew the roads that do not end. I mounted my horse, pulling my heavy wool cloak tight against the damp. As we rode toward the churning gray water of the channel, the massive dark timber hall of Tamworth faded into the fog. I carried the king's gold in my pouch. I was walking past the edge of the deep forests to see what held the sky up in the lands of stone. Act 2, the Marble Fortress. Systemic annotation. A city that does not decay at human speed. Permanence enforced through administration. The sea had been gray and heavy for weeks. I stood near the bow of the creaking timber vessel, alongside Isaac ben Nathan, listening to the sailors shout in tongues I could not separate into meaning. Then, a profound silence fell over the deck. The wind caught our sail, and I looked across the water. Constantinople did not appear to approach us. It felt as though it had always been waiting behind the horizon. Walls of pale stone stretched farther than my eyes could comprehend. It did not look built. It looked placed. I thought my king's hall in Mercia was a marvel. I thought a timber palisade meant absolute safety. But I had never seen a thing that refused to rot. We passed beneath heavy chains stretched across the harbor water like ironed lightning. High above us, Roman soldiers stood on the defensive towers. I watched 1,000 men drill in the shadow of the Theodosian walls. They did not scream oaths to their ancestors. They moved as a single, silent machine. War here was not a chaotic clash of heroes in the mud. It was an engineering calculation of logistics and deterrence. The sea itself was leashed here, not by men with spears shouting oaths, but by heavy iron stretched across the mouth of the world. When we disembarked, my boots struck the ground of the city, and the sound was sharp, echoing, and final. The earth here had forgotten softness. We walked under sweeping stone arches, past aqueduct shadows that stretched like ribs across the massive districts. There was a smell in the air I had never encountered, a mixture of crushed incense, dry dust, and heated marble. Every movement in the streets felt accounted for. I watched a clerk writing on parchment inside a shaded arcade. He did not look up as our caravan passed. His quill scratched rhythmically. I realized then that the act of writing felt more powerful than speech. In my land, words live in the warm breath of men, spoken over firelight. Here, words are pinned to skin that does not die. Isaac led us to an administrative courtyard to register our passage. A Byzantine official named Niketas awaited us. He did not threaten. He did not welcome us. He simply existed within his function. Through Isaac's quiet translations, Niketas spoke not of ownership or violence, but of continuance, taxes, passage, record. He moved his hands the way our warriors move spears, with practiced, lethal efficiency. Authority here was not carried in a man's bicep. It was distributed through procedure. Niketas gestured to into my pouch. I withdrew the Alpha dinar. He took it, held it up to the light, and examined it. He did not test its weight. He did not bite it to check the gold. He examined it solely for legitimacy. They did not ask what the gold was worth. They asked where it was allowed to be. Nikkei Tas stamped a wax seal onto a piece of parchment, and a lesser clerk took my coin. It disappeared behind a curtain of bureaucracy. It was then I realized, in Mercia, gold is carried. Here, gold is reassigned. Before we returned to the ships, I stood in the great square before the Hagia Sophia. It was a dome so vast it felt less like a roof, and more like a second sky installed by human hands. Golden light poured through its upper arches, like judgment made visible. I stepped backward, deeply disoriented. My mind, trained in the deep forests, tried to find the timber in it. I looked for the great wooden beams, the joints, the weakness. There was none. In Mercia, we understand buildings by how they might fall. Here, I could not find where the falling would begin. That evening, the city glowed, not like a hearth fire, but like stone absorbing the heat of the sunset. It felt stable in a way that was almost oppressive to a man of the woods. I came from a world that burns. I entered a world that does not allow burning to matter. A place can be so strong, it no longer needs to move. Act 3, the Silk Router. Systemic annotation. Trust made physical without weight. A web of ink that outweighs 1,000 spears. The oppressive gray seas of the Romans gave way to endless, shimmering dunes, and suddenly to the violent green of the Tigris River Valley. The roads here were not paved in heavy stone, but packed hard by the hooves of 1,000,000 passing horses. Up ahead rose Baghdad. It was not a wall trying to keep the world out. It was a massive, perfect circle, a wheel pulling the horizon inward. The Romans built their city to stop the world. These men built theirs to swallow it. I entered the gates and immediately braced myself for the crush of bodies. But the energy here was different. It was an explosion of sound, heat, and color. Spices bled into the air: cinnamon, saffron, roasting meat, and the sharp tang of hot dust. I touched the hilt of my sax out of instinct, but no one was looking at me. I was not a threat. I was barely a ripple in the river. In Mercia, a stranger is a danger until he speaks his father's name. Here, there are too many fathers to name. The crowd moved like water. If you drop your sword here, it does not ring. It drowns. In the sprawling market, a dispute erupted between our caravan and a rival trading guild over a debt of passage. Men raised their voices. I drew my sax half out of its sheath, waiting for the inevitable blood. Instead, a mediator named Ahmad ibn Saul arrived holding a ledger. A few calm words were exchanged. A leaf of paper was signed, and the wrath vanished into the air. Blood was not spilled. The violence had been absorbed and dissolved by the network. Ahmad wore robes of fine, dyed cotton, and possessed eyes that seemed to constantly measure the air around him. I pulled out my king's coin to show him. Ahmed glanced at it, smiled politely, and pointed to a merchant's stall. The exact same alien script stamped on my gold was carved into the wooden arches above me. I realized then that my great king did not invent this magic. He only copied it. I held my king's gold, but the marks that made it magic back home were painted on the fruit stalls here. I felt very small. I watched Isaac negotiate the purchase of a mountain of raw silk with Ahmed. I stepped closer, expecting heavy chests of silver to be hauled forward, expecting axes to be drawn to guard the transfer. Instead, Ahmed dipped a reed pen into a dark vial. He scratched a few fluid lines onto a thin, white sheet. A suftaja. He handed the white leaf to Isaac. Isaac folded it, tucked it into his belt, and the deal was done. I had watched a man buy 100 horses' worth of woven light, and he paid with black stains on paper. And the other man smiled. In the north, to write a single prayer, a whole herd of beasts must die for their skins. Here, Ahmed explained through Isaac, they wove the ghosts of old rags and riverweeds into endless white fields. They trapped voices on them faster than a man can speak. That night, in a lantern-lit courtyard, I watched men of every faith argue passionately over open scrolls. My people fight for cattle, and we die for muddy hills. These men fought over the shadows of dead empires, hunting the thoughts of buried kings. They did not need walls of Roman stone. A web of ink and trust, I realized, is stronger than a fortress. You cannot siege a river. You cannot burn a root. Act 4, the celestial grid. Systemic annotation. Movement predicted before it happens. Water told its exact shape. We traveled for months, leaving the chaos of the trade roads behind. The horizon grew flat, measured, and absolute. Then Chang'an appeared. At first, it did not feel like a city. It felt like a diagram made real. Baghdad had pulled the world into motion. This place told motion where it was allowed to go. The walls ran straight. Gate towers aligned with absolute precision. The roads did not curve gently around the terrain. They corrected the terrain. I stepped through the great gate and immediately slowed, expecting the crush of 1,000,000 souls. In Mercia, men collide because they must. Here, they did not. 2 lines of people crossed in front of me at perfect orthogonal angles, like threads drawn tight across a loom. No one spoke. No one yielded. No one touched. I stopped walking. A man behind me clicked his tongue, not in anger, but in correction. I realized then that I had become the obstruction. In Mercia, the world is uncertain because men are uncertain. Here, even the uncertainty had been accounted for. Suddenly, a massive drum tower sounded overhead. It was not decorative. It was a temporal weapon. At the exact moment the drum struck, the entire city responded. Gates closed, markets paused, roads emptied. Citizens shifted direction in synchronized, fluid waves. I froze, realizing that time itself was being administered. In my land, night arrives because the sun fails. Here, night arrives because it is ordered to begin. I was brought before a registration official named Li Wei. He was not a king nor a priest. He was a function. Li Wei looked at the documents Isaac provided, then turned to a massive record book on his desk. He ran a long, manicured finger down a column of ink. My arrival was already expected, not guessed, not hoped for, recorded. Li Wei did not ask who I was. He asked whether I matched what had already been written. In Mercia, a man becomes important by what he can take with his own two hands. In this place, a man becomes important by what he can repeat without error. Through the open doors, I saw the examination halls. Hundreds of men seated apart, each alone inside a collective silence, writing within constraints so precise it felt like measurement rather than thought. Every human life appeared as entries in stacked ledgers. It was an accounting of behavior across time. I watched a column of imperial guards escort a chained man across the courtyard. There was no rage in the guards, no defiance in the condemned. Violence here was not a passion. It was a procedure. I tried to imagine a rebellion here, but my mind could not find where it would begin. Not because the military force was overwhelming, but because deviation had no place to start. A man may raise a sword in Mercia. A man may argue in the courtyards of Baghdad. But here, I could not find where a man would stand in order to become wrong. When my journey was registered, Li Wei dismissed me with a flick of his wrist, like a variable that had completed its function. The grid did not imprison movement. It simply made movement predictable. I looked down the road back west. It no longer felt like a path. It felt like something that was always already measured. Some worlds are made of movement. Some are made of stone. Some are made of ink. But this place is made of certainty. Act 5. The untranslatable world. Systemic annotation. Some knowledge cannot return home unchanged. The sea I crossed to return was cold, but I did not feel like the same man returning. My cloak was heavier. My silence was different, not emptier, more structured. I thought I had walked across the world, but I had walked across 4 ways of deciding what the world is. I stepped back into the timber hall of Mercia. Everything was familiar, but now it felt unfinished, like something half-built and forgotten. The men looked up from their ale horns, expecting a story. They asked me what I had seen beyond the water. I could not answer them, not because I forgot, but because nothing I had words for still existed in their mouths. I tried to speak of stone that governs movement. I tried to speak of ink that replaces the weight of silver. I tried to speak of a city that computes the behavior of its people, but each phrase collapsed into confusion. A man may return from battle and be understood, but a man who returns from structure itself speaks in a tongue that has no soil to root in. I placed the Offa coin on the scarred table. It was no longer sacred. It was just a local translation of a foreign value. I once believed this gold proved my king's reach. Now I knew it only proved how far I had not yet gone. Mercia taught me how to survive a day. Byzantium taught me how to endure centuries. Baghdad taught me how to move through the invisible. Chang'an taught me the most difficult truth of all. Some places are not experienced. They are absorbed, and they do not release you unchanged. In Mercia, death is faced in the mud. In the marble fortress, it is delayed by stone. In Baghdad, it is dissolved by paper. In Chang'an, it is scheduled by the drum. Interlude, the failed return. He returned to Mercia, but return was only a geographic fact. The mind that had learned stone, paper, and administrative time could no longer live entirely inside wet timber, mud, oath, and spear. The journey did not end at the hall. The hall became the first boundary he could no longer inhabit. Book 2, Boundary Dissolution, the North American Addendum, Aurora Archives, Systemic History Division, Editorial Note. On the North American Addendum, this document represents a debated continuation of the Mercian Itinerary. While Book 1 traces Kinnaewolf's journey through Byzantium, Baghdad, and Chang'an, the following text derives from a fragmented cache attributed to the Pacific coast of the Americas and placed roughly 4 years after the Chang'an logs. The tone of this fragment presents a radical departure from the first record. The rigid, observational syntax used to describe the administrative systems of the East collapses into hypersensory phenomenology. Scholars debate whether this shift is due to the psychological toll of the Beringian crossing, exposure to indigenous psychoactive pharmacognosy, or a fundamental epistemological breakdown. It serves as an artifact not merely of geographic travel, but of the disintegration of the observer's mind when subjected to an environment devoid of Eurasian boundary conditions. Plate 2.1, Boundary Dissolution Route Map, Chang'an to Sonora through the Beringian Drift. To map a system, the observer must stand outside it. To survive it, he must dissolve. Cartographic Index, Mercia Material Certainty / Survival by Proximity, Chang'an Predictive Control / Survival by Conformity, Sonora Systemic Dissolution / Survival by Symbiosis, Act 1, The Bering Drift, Systemic Annotation, a transition from algorithmic governance back to the chaos of physics. I could not remain in the West. I had stood in the timber hall of my king, but a man who has seen the absolute grid of the emperor's city can no longer live in the mud. I left the wet woods behind forever, traveling back to the edge of the known map. I needed to find where the grid stopped. I bought passage on a heavy-timbered merchant junk, sailing north and east, following the coastal trade routes toward the frozen edges of the map. On the deck, as the coastline faded, I unrolled the parchment Isaac Ben-Nay then had given me in Baghdad. It showed the world as the scholars knew it, a web of ink stretching from the wet woods of Mercia to the great drum towers of Chang'an. But to the east, there was only the blank, terrifying edge of the vellum. The grid stopped. I rolled the map up and sealed it in my bone tube. I would not need it anymore. We were swallowed by a gray, howling storm that stripped the mast and took 3 men into the freezing dark. For weeks, there was no sun, no stars, no grid. In Chang'an, time was administered by the strike of a great drum, dividing the day into perfect, obedient fractions. Out here, on the churning black water of the great ocean, time did not exist. There was only the freezing spray, the groan of splitting wood, and the terrifying, empty weight of survival. When the hull finally struck land, shattering against a coastline of towering, ancient pines, I crawled onto the black sand and wept. I did not weep for the dead. I wept because the earth beneath me felt vast, indifferent, and completely unmeasured. I walked south for months. The towering pines gave way to scrub, and the scrub gave way to an endless, scorching expanse of red rock and dust. I was a man of the wet woods. In Mercia, water falls from the sky and rots the earth. Here, the sky was a furnace, and the earth was baked into cracked ceramic. I met men here, moving like ghosts through the heat haze. They did not build stone walls like the Romans. They did not write their debts on paper like the Rhodonites. They moved with the seasons, tracking the invisible arteries of water hidden beneath the rock. I walked with them because to stop moving in this wasteland was to invite the birds of prey. I had left the world of kings and ledgers. I had entered the furnace. Act 2, the rot and the resin. Systemic annotation. Mercian survival requires conquering the earth. Desert survival requires integrating with it. The desert began to dismantle me long before my mind failed. My body, built for the cold, damp shield walls of the north, was starved of water and burned by the light. A deep gash on my forearm, caught on the jagged red rock of a canyon wall days ago, had begun to rot. The edges of the skin were pulled back, angry and hot to the touch. The infection sent a creeping fire up my shoulder, blurring my vision. In the wet woods of Mercia, I had seen the lay Akas, our healers, treat such things. They would gather mugwort and waybroad, grinding them in a mortar while chanting the old 9 herbs charm. They prayed to Christ and Woden alike to cast out the invisible flying venom. We treated the body as a battlefield, fighting the earth with incantations. When the herbs and the prayers failed, they used a red-hot iron blade to burn the rot away. I lay against a sun-baked rock, waiting for the fever to take me. But my desert guide did not look to the sky for gods, and he spoke no charms. He did not fight the earth. He simply walked to a low, sprawling bush with small, waxy leaves. It was a harsh, unyielding thing, yet it carried a scent that struck the back of the throat, a sharp, resinous smell of rain hitting dry earth. He stripped a handful of the leaves and crushed them between 2 flat stones. The friction released a thick, golden-green resin. Without ceremony, he pressed the crushed, bitter poultice directly into my open flesh, binding it with a strip of agave fiber. I braced my jaw, waiting for the searing agony of the healer's fire. But there was no fire, only a fierce, biting cleanliness that sank deep into the muscle. Within a day, the heat retreated from my blood. The rot had stopped. The resin of the bush had hunted the invisible corruption and killed it. It was a profound shock to my Mercian mind. In the marble fortress of Byzantium, they built massive walls to keep the wild world out. In my homeland, we hacked at the forests with axes to carve out a safe space to breathe. We treated the earth as an adversary to be walled off or burned down. But my guide did not fight the desert. He knew its chemistry. He knew that the very wasteland that was stripping the moisture from my lungs also grew the exact resin required to knit my skin back together. To survive here, you do not build a wall against the earth. You allow the earth into your blood. Act 3, the edge without walls. Systemic annotation. A system without boundary conditions cannot produce fear. We were somewhere past the jagged spine of the Red Mountains when the geometry of the world finally began to fail. Not the land. The land remained precise. Cracked stone, radiating heat, vast distance. It was my sense of boundary that started to come apart. I remember trying to speak to the guide, a man whose name did not hold its shape in my mouth, about a terrible, rising pressure in my spine, like heat trapped beneath an iron anvil. I gripped the hilt of my sax, a Mercian reflex. Iron resolves the unknown, but my hands were numb, and the iron felt utterly irrelevant, like holding a twig against the ocean. Suddenly, the sky moved, not with wind, not with cloud, with intention. Shapes crossed the bruised horizon, too large to name, too slow to be real, tearing at the fabric of the air like the wings of impossible birds. You cannot divide what does not stand apart, the guide said. Or perhaps he did not speak at all. Perhaps the thought simply bloomed in the front of my skull. Earlier that night, by a fire of dry scrub, they had handed me the dried crowns of a low, rootless plant. The Lophophora. It did not burn the blood like ale, or cloud the mind like poppy smoke. It was quieter than that. It entered without force. What followed was not confusion. It was the sudden, violent removal of something I had never known was there. The boundary. I looked at my hand and could not locate where my skin ended and the dry air began. The fire did not sit in front of me. It moved with the exact rhythm of my pulse. The desert floor did not support me. It rose and fell as though breathing, and I was not separate from its motion. Panic should have come, that sharp, clarifying edge of terror that keeps a man alive in the shield wall. The mechanism that produces fear, distance, threat, response, sought a target, but found absolutely no purchase in my mind. I searched for the edge of myself and could not find where it had been. Here, there was no outside. I had believed I was moving through distant systems, a lone node crossing a vast grid. But as the bitter flesh took hold beneath the swirling violet sky, the grid dissolved. There was no movement, only participation. Then came the sound, not from a place, not from a source. It did not travel across the air as a thing apart. It was already there, waiting like heat in the stone. A pulse, low, repeating, certain it did not strike my ear. It struck through me. I turned to locate it. Men sat by the fire, though sat is the wrong word. They moved without displacement, torsos swaying, heads lowered, hands falling in measured descent upon stretched hide. An instrument, but not separate from the hand that struck it. The skin of the drum, the skin of the hand, the skin of my own body, one surface, folded into itself, striking. The rhythm did not advance. It circled, returned again. No beginning, no end. I tried to count it, a Mercian reflex, to divide the world into units, to master it by number. But the count dissolved before it could hold. Between the pulses, voices rose. Not singing as we do in halls, with verse and order, but tones, elongated, bending, folding back into the rhythm that birthed them. The voices did not sit above the drum. They were carried within it, like flame carried within heat. The fire answered. Its movement was no longer random. Each flicker rose in sympathy, not mimicking, but participating. Light became rhythm. Heat became rhythm. Breath became rhythm. And I, who had believed himself an observer, was taken into the pattern. I was not hearing the sound. I was inside it. Time, as I had known it, the measured strike of Chang'an's drums, the division of day into obedient fragments, collapsed. There was only recurrence, only cycle, only return. The dance was not movement across ground. It was alignment with the pulse. The body does not move. It is moved. The rhythm pulled me down. It pulled me through the crust of the desert floor, sinking my consciousness through layers of dry, cracked rock, until I hit something cold, wet, and endlessly dark. The heat of the furnace vanished. I was beneath the water, a vast, silent, freezing lake, and there, sleeping in the suffocating black silt, I saw them. A graveyard of hollowed timber, dozens of wooden vessels, carved from the trunks of massive trees, laid to rest side by side in the mud. I touched the waterlogged wood with a mind that no longer possessed hands. The wood spoke to me in a language of deep, unimaginable time. I felt the crushing weight of 5,000 winters, thousands of years before the Romans dragged their first marble block, millennia before the Tang emperors mathematically mapped their grid. Men had moved across the face of this earth. They had left no stone walls to crumble. They had struck no gold coins to be stolen. They had simply hollowed out the wood, stepped into the water, and become the river. They had survived by leaving no rigid trace to be broken. Act 4, the active node. I awoke days later, covered in a fine layer of pale dust. The violet geometries had vanished from the sky, replaced by the brutal, blinding white of the desert morning. My sacks lay in the dirt a few paces away. I looked at the iron blade. For my entire life, I had defined my existence by what that blade could sever. I had believed that strength meant standing against the world and refusing to break. But iron is a parasite. It takes from the earth, it strikes, and eventually it rusts. I left the blade in the dirt. I did not need it anymore. I had crossed the world looking for the origin of power. I had seen power stored in vaults, written on ledgers, and calculated by massive bureaucracies. I saw that all of it was fragile, because all of it relied on separating humanity from the environment it consumed. The Romans and the emperors were fighting a war against time, and time will eventually crush their marble into sand. But the men who carved the ancient wooden vessels 5,000 years ago did not fight time. They moved within it. The guide handed me a gourd of water. I drank, feeling the cold liquid join the architecture of my own cells. I was no longer a broken unit wandering through hostile territory. I was a functioning piece of the desert's own mechanism. Mercia taught me how to survive a day. Byzantium taught me how to endure centuries. Baghdad taught me how to move through the invisible. Chang'an taught me the limits of control. But the desert taught me how to dissolve. The rhythm of the water drum never truly left me. It vibrates in the silica of the earth, in the hollows of the ancient, sunken wood, and in the marrow of my bones. You cannot be destroyed by a world you have entirely become. Interlude the ecological error. The desert did not destroy him because the desert allowed participation. Its austerity could be survived by rhythm, resin, water, and surrender. But what saves a man in one ecology may become fatal in another. Dissolution was not salvation. It was only the loss of the wall. Book 3, Terminal Assimilation. The Shebelba Fragment. Aurora Archives. Systemic History Division. Editorial note on the terminal node. This document represents the final, fragmented conclusion of the Mercian Itinerary. Recovered not from the arid Sonoran coast, but deep within the Petén basin of the Mesoamerican jungle, the physical artifact itself marks a profound degradation. The text is no longer recorded on Eurasian parchment, but on indigenous amate, or fig bark paper. Crucially, mass spectrometry of the artifact reveals heavy contamination with datura stramonium tropane alkaloids bound directly into the cellulose fibers. This forensic evidence suggests the author was exposed to, or actively consuming, severe, naturally occurring deliriums during its composition. Volume 3 presents a terrifying chronological descent. What begins as a record of integration and agrarian peace during the onset of the terminal classic, Maya, drought, rapidly degrades into profound psychological collapse. The observer's meticulously constructed boundary dissolution, which allowed him to survive the vastness of the desert, becomes his absolute vulnerability in the suffocating, predatory ecology of the deep jungle. The scar pattern references should be read as speculative forensic reconstruction based on amphibian peptide biology and regional biogeography, not as evidence for a documented classic Maya pharmacological rite. Plate 3.1, Terminal Assimilation Route Map, Sonora to Petén. When the observer dissolves, the boundary falls. But the system does not end. It feeds. Cartographic Index, Mercia Material Certainty / Survival by Proximity, Chang'an Predictive Control / Survival by Conformity, Sonora Systemic Dissolution / Survival by Symbiosis, Petén Terminal Assimilation / Erasure of the observer. I asked him where the journey ended. He pointed to the soil and said nothing at all. The earth does not record your steps. It digests them. Act 1, the hearth. I have unlearned the weight of iron. The sacks that I carried from the wet woods of Mercia, across the marble floors of Byzantium, and through the geometric grids of Chang'an, remains buried in the red dust of the northern desert. I do not miss its weight upon my hip. I do not miss the man who required it to feel safe. Systemic annotation. Symbiosis achieved. The cessation of hostility between the observer and the environment. We traveled south for many moons, leaving the cracked, blinding expanse of the wasteland for the fertile, sweeping highlands. The earth here is soft, green, and endlessly forgiving. We settled in a village built of pale limestone and thatched roofs, perched above a vast emerald valley. There is a woman here. She does not speak the language of my king, and I do not speak hers, but we found a dialect in the spaces between our hands. Her name sounds like rain striking broad leaves. When the fever of the desert journey threatened to crack my mind, it was her hands that crushed the bitter herbs, her voice that tethered me to the waking world. In Mercia, a wife is a political treaty, a merging of cattle and shields. Here, she is the very soil I have rooted in. I sat beside the fire last night and watched her weave dyed cotton across a wooden loom. She is carrying my child. I pressed my ear to her swelling stomach, closing my eyes against the glow of the hearth. Beneath the surface of her skin, I heard the rapid, fluid rhythm of a second heart. She ran her fingers through my hair and hummed a low, trembling melody, a lullaby of her highlands for the life growing inside her. I did not know the words, but I understood the cadence. Sleep, little root. The earth is soft. The rain will come. The dark is warm. It did not sound like the massive, booming war drums of the Tang Emperor, attempting to butcher time into obedient fractions. It sounded like the river, unbroken, continuous, alive. In the north, we build massive walls of timber to protect the future from the horrors of the dark. We hide behind palisades, terrified of what the earth will do to us. But here, the future grows in the open, protected only by the warmth of the sun and the alignment of the rains. I have learned to dissolve my borders. I am no longer a warrior bracing for the siege. I am a man at peace, Act 2, the migration. But the sky forgot how to weep. It happened slowly at first. The seasonal rains, which the elders read like clockwork, simply did not arrive. The emerald valley below our village turned the color of bruised copper. The air grew perfectly, terrifyingly still. Systemic annotation. The ecosystem fails. Safety requires a return to movement, abandoning the established routes. The village relied on massive, underground limestone cisterns, chultuns, to hold the water through the dry months. I climbed down into the basin yesterday to draw the morning water. My bucket struck dry stone. The beautiful white plaster lining the floor of the cistern was webbed with deep, jagged cracks. It looked like the skull of a starved animal. The elders spoke in hushed, urgent tones around the central fire. The drought was not breaking. The crops of maize had withered on the stalk, turning to gray ash in our hands. If we stayed in the highlands, we would die. We had to move south, down into the deep canopy, down into the endless, suffocating green. We packed what little we could carry. I walked close to her, watching the way her hands rested protectively over the child as we descended the mountain paths. The transition was absolute. The open sky of the highlands was swallowed by an ancient, towering canopy of mahogany and cedar. The sun was choked out, replaced by a permanent twilight gloom. The desert had been an empty room. This jungle is a stomach. Systemic annotation. The onset of systemic pressure. The environment shifts from passive to predatory. Everything here is eating something else. The trees strangle each other for light. The earth is coated in a thick, spongy layer of wet rot that pulls at my boots. The humidity does not cool the skin, it clings to it. I wipe the sweat from my neck, and the moisture smells faintly of decay. The insects are invisible, but I feel them moving against my skin, leaving angry red welts that burn in the twilight. At night, the canopy clicks and breathes. I lay awake, listening to the heavy, wet drops of condensation falling from the leaves. In the dark, the dripping sounds exactly like the slow, rhythmic tapping of a blacksmith's hammer on a Mercian anvil, a sound that does not belong here. I try to take a deep breath, but the wet heat presses down against my chest. It feels heavy, deliberate, and intelligent, like a physical hand resting over my lungs, testing my strength, waiting for me to exhale so it can press harder. Act 3, the green wall. My hands tremble constantly now. It is not only the fever of the damp, nor the exhaustion of the relentless heat. The sickness has learned my bones. It wakes before I do. It waits behind the joints, behind the teeth, behind the thin skin of the wrists. In the northern desert, I learned to open the walls of my mind with the vapor of the river toad. That was a clean terror, a white terror. The world became geometry, and I became wide enough to survive it. But the jungle did not ask me to become wide. It asked me to disappear. Systemic annotation. The epidermal boundary is sacrificed to preserve the psychological boundary. The first time they brought me the green frog, we had not yet reached this final jungle. We were still in the wet western lowlands, where the dry forest woke violently after rain and the trees filled with voices. I believed it was medicine. I had been shaking for 2 days. My thoughts struck against one another like loose iron rings. The canopy pressed so low above us that I could feel the weight of every leaf. One of the lowland men took my arm and showed me the old circles on his own skin. Small moons of raised flesh, pale at the rim, dark at the center. Pain, then silence. That was the law. I remember the smell first. Not smoke exactly. Not meat. A dry, bitter sting where the skin was opened. Then the green milk touched the wound, and the body rose against itself. My heart hammered hard enough to break the ribs. My mouth filled with water. My stomach emptied until there was nothing left in me but heat and prayer. Then the punishment passed, and after it passed, the jungle became bearable. The insects retreated to the edge of the world. The rot lost its teeth. The wet air no longer pressed upon my lungs like a hand. I could walk for hours without feeling the cuts in my feet. I could listen to the canopy breathe and not mistake it for a thing waiting to eat me. I thought I had found another form of courage, but courage does not leave scars in rows. My arms are mapped with them now. Small circular wounds, some healed, some angry, some still shining beneath the sweat. I hide them from her when I can. She has seen them. Of course she has seen them. Her eyes move to my wrists when I wake shaking in the dark. And she does not ask what I have done to myself. That is worse than asking. Once, while she slept, I found her thumb resting against one of the fresh circles on my wrist. Not holding it, not healing it, only touching the place where I had made a door in myself. I moved her hand away before she woke. I could not bear to be forgiven. The men of the deep canopy watch me differently since the supply failed. They no longer study my hands to judge whether I am a warrior. They no longer study my feet to see whether I can march. They study the scars. Then they study my eyes. In Mercia, my eyes were only the color of pale winter grass. Here, in the deep green, they whisper a word when the fire catches my face. Yash. Jade, to them, I am no longer only a man. I am a broken vessel with green light inside it. A thing already opened. A thing already taught to give itself away. The sickness worsens as the night thickens. Cloth hurts. Breath hurts. The touch of my own hair against my neck is a blade. My legs kick beneath me, though I command them to be still. My belly twists and empties, as if the jungle has placed a hand inside me and begun wringing me out. I would burn every circle fresh again if I had the medicine. I would trade every inch of skin for 1 hour of silence. My desperation makes me blind. When the eldest of our guides approaches me in the dark, he does not look like a captor. He looks like a man answering a request I have not spoken aloud. He sees the shaking. He sees the ruined circles. He sees the wetness running from my eyes and nose. He sees the way my fingers claw at my own forearms, searching for a door back into the quiet. He kneels beside me and places a carved wooden bowl between us. The liquid inside is pale and thick, smelling of crushed stems, and a sickly sweet white flower shaped like a hanging trumpet. He touches one finger to my wrist, to the scars, then to the center of my forehead. Systemic annotation. The trap of false mercy. The observer consumes his own destruction. Not medicine, transition. I know this. Some part of me knows this. But the body is louder than the mind. The body is a starving animal locked inside a burning house. I take the bowl with both hands. They shake so violently that the liquid laps against the carved rim. Across the fire, my wife turns in her sleep, one hand resting over the child. I should call to her. I should stand. I should run. Instead, I drink. Act 4, the poison. It does not comfort me. That is the first betrayal. I had expected the green silence, the soft removal of pain, the familiar distance opening between the body and the world. But this poison does not build distance. It destroys the idea that distance ever existed. The sickness in my bones does not end. It changes language. Systemic annotation. The physiological prelude to delirium. The loss of temporal anchoring. The wetness stops first. That is how I know something has gone wrong. The tears on my face vanish. The running from my nose ceases, as if plugged by clay. The cramps in my belly do not end, they freeze, locked in place, an animal trapped mid-bite. A moment ago my body was emptying itself. Now it is sealed. My mouth dries with impossible speed. The moisture vanishes from my tongue, from my throat, from the soft places behind the teeth. I reach for the water skin and pour the warm liquid past my cracked lips, but it brings no relief. The water touches me without entering me. It rolls over the dead surface of the tongue like rain over fired clay. The jungle sharpens. Every ember becomes a wound of light. Every leaf acquires an edge. The air fills with hidden movement, though nothing moves. My pupils drink the dark until the dark begins drinking back. I try to speak her name. Only a dry clicking leaves my jaw. Across the fire, the elder watches with absolute calm. He has not given me silence. He has removed the last wall. A terrible, radiant heat begins to boil beneath my skin. I strip the tunic from my chest, clawing frantically at the rough linen. My skin is flush, burning red, entirely stripped of sweat. I am trapped inside a failing vessel. And then the jungle begins to change. The pressure on my chest, which I had felt building for days, is no longer an invisible weight. It has taken a form. Heavy, damp, malignant, it is the mare. The night hag of the Mercian fens has followed me across the ocean, across the vast and empty map, and she is sitting upon my lungs. I can feel her wet, decaying hair brushing against my throat. A man steps from the broad ferns at the edge of the camp. He wears the heavy, rusted iron chainmail of my king, dripping with dark English bog water. But when he turns his head toward the firelight, there is no face beneath the helmet. Only a smooth plain of pale, bruised flesh. I speak to him. He does not answer. I look down at my forearm. The skin is crawling. Hundreds of tiny, black beetles are burrowing up from beneath my scars, breaking the surface of my flesh in a horrifying swarm. I frantically pick them off, crushing their hard carapaces between my fingers. But there is no blood. There is only the sickening feeling of my own skin tearing as I dig deeper, trying to pull the roots of the infestation out of my muscle. The boundary collapses. I am walking. I do not remember standing up. The camp is gone. The fire is gone. The jungle is a cathedral of rotting pillars, and every shadow is a hound waiting to strike. The bar guest is in the canopy. I can hear its heavy, rhythmic breathing. It knows about the jade. It knows about the sacred stone buried in my skull. I must hide them in the dark. Act 5. The flight without direction. I plunge deeper into the blackness, desperate to escape the pressing weight of the canopy. I crash through a dense thicket of broad leaves, tearing my shoulders against hidden, hooked thorns. The physical pain is distant, muted by the roaring in my ears. The dark is absolute, yet my blown pupils pull agonizing, geometric shapes from the gloom. The spectrum of light has shattered. The blackness of the canopy above me resolves into a collapsing, infinite grid of obsidian squares. To the east, where the sun should rise, the darkness bleeds into a sheer, vertical plane of crimson. Ahead of me, rising from the rotting earth like a drowned giant, is a massive wall of stone. It is staggering in its scale, carved with jagged, snarling faces and twisting, plumed serpents. It is an ancient ruin of this land, swallowed by the roots centuries ago, its plazas cracked and heaving. But my fractured mind cannot hold the truth of it. I look at the crumbling limestone and see the Roman walls of Britannia. I see the ruins of the empire that ruled my ancestors, the great stone boundaries built to keep the wild world at bay. I throw my hands against the wet stone, searching frantically for the iron gate, begging the dead legions to let me inside. The geometry of the serpents carved into the rock begins to writhe under my palms, uncoiling into perfect, slithering spirals. The wall is alive. It will let me pass. I have to move. They are behind me, or in front, or above. The trees are too close together to see. I run. The ground is soft. No, it pulls. It holds my feet like wet hands. Each step sinks. Each step is slower than the last. North, I must go north. Back to the dry. Back to the open sky. But the sun does not exist here. There is no north. There is no sky. Only the grid. Only the green. Only green. Only green. Something moves to my left. A shape between the trunks. Tall, wrong, watching. The bar guest. No breath, no sound, but it follows. I run faster. My chest splits open. The mare tightens her grip. I cannot draw air deep enough to live. Water. I see it ahead. A clear pool between the roots. I fall to my knees. I plunge my hands into it. Dry leaves. Only dry leaves. I am still thirsty. My tongue cracks. My teeth scrape against it like stone. I stand. I run. The same tree. I have passed this tree before. The split trunk. The white fungus like a wound. No, I have not. I turn. I run the other way. The same tree. The same tree. The same tree. They are not chasing me. They do not need to. The jungle closes the paths behind me as I walk. It folds, it seals, it digests. I am not escaping. I am being moved. Act 6, the feast. My knees finally buckle. The rotting floor of the jungle rushes up to meet me, and I lie in the wet mulch beneath the impenetrable black canopy. The flight is over. The panic has burned through the last reserves of my muscle. The optical geometry of the world stops spinning, locking into a terrifying, rigid grid of raw color. The air is black, a suffocating western descent into the earth. But ahead of me, breaking the dark, is a sharp, flickering triangle of red. I hear the crackle of burning wood. The smell of rich, slow-roasting fat drifts through the heavy, stagnant air. The aroma is intoxicating, pulling me forward by the sheer, animal force of starvation. I do not know whether any of this is happening outside me. I drag myself toward the red light. A small clearing opens before me. A fire burns at the center. The figures sitting around it are no longer men. The poison has stripped them of all humanity, reducing their bodies to flat, shifting tessellations of color and heat. They do not look surprised to see me crawling from the dark. They do not draw weapons or raise their voices. They simply part in silence, opening a space for me beside the burning hearth. I collapse into the dirt. The elder with the carved bowl is here, though his face is now a smooth, terrifying plain of white bone. He smiles, a slow, unnatural stretching of his jaw, and hands me a heavy piece of charred meat resting upon a broad leaf. It glows with a dull, sickly hue in my fractured vision. I am so hungry. The void in my stomach is a physical agony, a black hole demanding to be filled at any cost. I do not ask what animal they have hunted in this dead jungle. I do not care. I tear into the meat with my teeth, the hot grease running down my chin and soaking into the collar of my tunic. I gorge myself, stripping the meat with a frantic, ravenous desperation. It is soft. It is sweet. It is the most incredible thing I have ever tasted. The rich fat coats the back of my throat. I chew through a piece of charred, yielding gristle, and for a fraction of a second, the delirium breaks. I recognize the heavy, iron-rich taste of the salt. I look down at the curve of the bone resting on the leaf. It is a human rib. I remember the bowl, the white flour, the bitter milk. This is not the jungle. This is inside me. My stomach turns. No, it opens. A hollow space, widening beneath my ribs. There is something in my mouth. Fibers wet, stringing between my teeth. I chew. I look down at the leaf in my hands. Green pulp, crushed leaves, no. Cloth, no. Skin, no. I pull a hard shard from my teeth. White. It does not yield. I hold it to the fractured light. It is carved. A pattern of crossing lines. Geometry cut into the marrow. It is something known, something safe. I reach for the memory. Sleep, little root. But the drug erases it, like mist, like breath on glass. The familiarity dissolves into the green. I swallow the sweet flesh. The pattern, I know the pattern. A wooden loom. They fed me. No, I fed myself. The jungle does not chase. It does not hunt. It waits for the mouth to open. And I opened mine. The hunger deepens. It is no longer in my belly. It is behind my eyes. The jade, they do not want to take it. They want me to give it. Act 7, the offering. The hunger stops. It is not satisfied. It is simply no longer mine. The hollow space has been filled. The body descends into the roots. The wet earth rises to meet the skin. No resistance, no iron, only the yielding of the boundary. The eyes open. The canopy has parted. Pinpricks of silver, light pierce the absolute black. The night sky, the final unbroken map. The mind reaches for the stars. It demands a shape. It demands a boundary. A straight line. 3 stars aligned. A sudden, deliberate break at the 4th. The geometry of decision. Hope is a physical pull. It follows the line. It is safe to move. The dark can still be cut. Another line crosses it. Warp and weft. The tension of the wooden loom. Order is returning. But the geometry frustrates. The points refuse to hold their rigid structure. The lines pulse. They thicken. They split. The straight line forks into a branching, wet capillary. The loom is not weaving thread. It is weaving veins. The stars are not distant fires. They are the firing of optic nerves, the damp receptors of a failing biology. The sky is breathing. It is not looking down. It is looking in. The broken unit is gone. The active node is connected. The rain does not come. The dark is warm. Taken, given, consumed, given, root takes, taken, 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 carbon, wet, warmed, green, 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 stone, plate 3.2, terminal plate reconstruction, micro spectrographic projection of the Petén terminal site artifact. The map is not a record of his location. The map is his remains. Archival addendum. Plate 3.2. Micro-spectrographic projection of the Petén terminal site artifact. Note, the terminal plate preserves the final cartographic attempt of the observer prior to complete cognitive integration. Forensic reconstruction confirms that the visual field is not oriented outwardly. The apparent constellations correspond to projected optic firing, and the connecting filaments resemble capillary branching patterns overlaid with anomalous organic residues. The apparent coordinate grid is the residue of pre-mortem pattern recognition hallucination imposed onto failing biological structure. The observer did not discover the sky. His final perception was absorbed into the organic structure of the canopy. The map is not a record of his location. The map is his remains, unified lexicon of encountered and symbiotic systems, Elfshot, Ilva Yeshat, an Anglo-Saxon explanatory framework for sudden, invisible affliction. In the timber node, the unknown is personified and feared. Violence that cannot be seen is attributed to the mythological. Alpha dinar, a gold coin bearing both Latin and Arabic inscriptions, not an origin of value, but a translation of an external system into local authority. Radhanites, a long-distance merchant network operating across religious and political boundaries. They do not belong to a localized place. They belong to continuous roots. Saftaja, a written instrument of deferred payment observed in the markets of Baghdad. Unlike Mercian silver, its value is not carried, but recognized. Kaju, imperial examinations, the bureaucratic filtration mechanism of Chang'an, a system where human action is measured against a pre-existing cosmological alignment rather than martial capacity or aristocratic birth. Theodosian architecture, the physical manifestation of Byzantine administrative continuity. Walls designed not just to repel armies, but to outlast the memory of the attacker. Baringian drift, a hypothetical trans-Pacific or Arctic coastal route connecting East Asian systems to the Americas. Used here as a speculative, undocumented pathway for isolated Eurasian traversal into the Mesoamerican hemisphere. Layakas, Mercian healers, the medico-spiritual practitioners of 8th century Anglo-Saxon England. Their healing paradigm treats disease as an external invader to be repelled by incantation, botanical mixture, or physical trauma. Laria tridentiata. Creosote bush, a botanical antimicrobial associated here with Sonoran systems. Its use contrasts with Eurasian reliance on physical excision or cauterization. Lophophoria williamsii. Mescaline, a biochemical technology used here as a narrative model for altered perceptual boundary recognition, shifting the observer from isolated unit to integrated participant. Resonant participation, a survival model based on rhythmic alignment rather than spatial control. The subject does not enforce a boundary against the environment, but aligns with the external pulse. Deramo Arfin scars. Burn matrix dependency. A speculative recurrent pattern of circular scarification associated with amphibian peptide exposure. In this reconstruction, the scars mark the narrator's failed attempt to preserve psychological boundaries by destroying the epidermal boundary. Mercian night demon, an Anglo-Saxon supernatural entity believed to sit upon the chest of sleepers. The cultural projection of sleep paralysis entities becomes a psychological terminus under anticholinergic distress, rhombic lattice, flesh star projection, the fundamental geometric reflex of the Mercian boundary cognition. Under profound delirium, this linear pattern is projected onto the observer's own expanding capillary networks. Toloache, Datura stramonium, a powerful deliriant plant of the Solanaceae family. Unlike psychedelics, which may expand perception, tropane alkaloids can induce true delirium, mydriasis, xerostomia, hyperthermia, hallucination, and repetitive automatic behavior. Shibalba cosmology. Directional color mapping. The spatial and spiritual framework of the classic Maya universe. In the narrative, the narrator's hallucination is interpreted through directional color mapping. East red, south yellow, north white, west black, and center green. Yash, jadeite. A sacred material in classic Maya cosmological framing, associated here with breath, green life, rain, and the fatal commodity value projected onto the narrator's eyes. Unified scholarly anchors. The full bibliography is included here as hard-coded reference matter for the complete edition. The narrative remains self-published speculative educational fiction and is not peer-reviewed. Chris Wickham, The Inheritance of Rome, Illuminating the Dark Ages, 400 to 1000. Penguin, 2009. Edward N. Lutwak, The Grand Strategy of the Byzantine Empire, Harvard University Press, 2009. Hugh Kennedy, When Baghdad Ruled the Muslim World, Da Capo Press, 2005. Marshall G. S. Hodgson, The Venture of Islam, Conscience and History in a World Civilization, University of Chicago Press, 1974. Mark Edward Lewis, China's Cosmopolitan Empire, The Tang Dynasty, Harvard University Press, 2009. Valerie Hansen, The Silk Road, A New History, Oxford University Press, 2012. Stephen Pollington, Leechcraft, Early English Charms, Plant Lore and Healing, Anglo-Saxon Books, 2000. Daniel E. Moorman, Native American Ethnobotany, Timber Press, 1998. Michael Pollan, How to Change Your Mind, Penguin Press, 2018. Brian Fagan, The Great Journey, The Peopling of Ancient America, University Press of Florida, 2004. Arthur Demarest, The Ancient Maya, The Rise and Fall of a rainforest civilization. Cambridge University Press, 2004. Carl Taub. Sacred Jades of the Maya. Studies of classic Maya jade, rulership, breath, and cosmology. Clinical toxicology literature on Datura stramonium, tropane alkaloids, anticholinergic delirium, mydriasis, xerostomia, hyperthermia, and hallucination. Amphibian peptide literature concerning deramoarphin and philomedusid frog secretions. Used here only as speculative biological framing rather than ethnographic claim. Residual cortical map. The hearth, the migration, the green wall, the wall, the feast, the offering, the offering, the offering,